It's amazing to think about it. It's actually the consideration of doing reviews online is now just a natural thing.
Right.
You stepped into a Ferrari 360 as your first car, right?
Yeah, my first car for my YouTube channel. And actually, it's kind of funny to think about it now because in 2013, the simple act of having a Ferrari 360 was enough to get people to watch your videos, which is so stupid because today there are YouTube channels where the people have Bugattis and Koenigsegg's and still nobody watches because we've all seen that stuff. But back 10 years ago, it was like, there's a guy on YouTube with a Ferrari. Like, whoa, let's hear what he has to say. And of course, now it seems so pedestrian, but at the time it really was an effective kind of launching point, which is just laughable by modern standards, basically.
Well, it was interesting to people because you would say, what is it like to actually own a Ferrari? It was that the format was that simple, right?
It really was. Every week I would try to do something different. Like here's an actual Ferrari ownership experience. And I think, 10 years, I think people forget about 20 years ago, there was a lot of mystery around exotic cars. You heard stories. You got to take the engine out to do an oil change. Like you hear those stories, right? In the pre-internet days. The early internet days, maybe the late 90s to the early 2010s, there was it was being demystified. And so I was kind of one of those people from the beginning who was like, hey, here's what it's actually like. Your buddy's buddy tells you that you got to, that the tires cost 10 grand, but here's like what it actually is like. And I think that was effective, at least, at that time.
When you were going to Emory and you were working for Porsche or even just starting out as an auto columnist, did you ever even consider the idea that an influencer could be a career?
No, God, no.
I mean, it wasn't coined anyway, right?
No, and I remember being at Emory and reading about how there were people making a lot of money on YouTube, and I was thinking to myself, oh, that's interesting. But like, I was getting an economics degree, and it was never going to be me. Like that, it literally was never a thought. My father's an attorney. I expected to work in an office my whole life. There was never even a concept in my mind that I would go down this road. And yeah, it's to this day, it's still surprising to me that like me, I don't feel like I'm as much of a fit for it as some of these other people who are maybe more of a, like ready for the celebrity of it or like the personality of it.
Well, you didn't spend a lot of time as a kid standing in front of a camera or anything, did you?
No, that wasn't something that was appealing to me. It wasn't a career path I ever thought I would have.
Before we get back to this interview, I want to say that this episode is brought to you by Connected by Reynolds & Reynolds. If you want to hear great conversations and Greg Ulan going deep with guests on everything from used car acquisitions to finding your niche and selling to it, I recommend adding Connected to your podcast rotation. Now let's get back to my interview.
So at what point did you sit down and say, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, here's what I'm going to do. And I know that there was an increased appeal in the format for viewers who wanted your perspective on it. On the vehicle, much more than this is what it's like to own a Ferrari. It became reviews to some extent.
Reviews. Yeah, I mean, it evolved. There was never like a moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, and here's how, and here's what. That never really happened. It sort of just evolved from the columns, and I've always felt and still feel that I'm a better writer than I am a video creator. But the online world has evolved as we sit here doing a podcast that's also on, you see like the writing is not as big of a priority for the audience anymore. And so it sort of was like, okay, I have to adapt or die. So that was one sort of evolution. And then things just sort of evolved from there. I did a couple of car reviews and realized, oh, these are performing better than my stupid videos where I drive through puddles and pretend like I'm off-roading. Like, okay, maybe I need to start doing even more car reviews. And that evolved, and that's sort of how the channel went. Whenever people ask me for advice, I always tell them to make the videos that your audience wants to see, not the ones that you necessarily want to make. And I think that I'm the best example of that. I really based what I did on what people seemed to respond to, and it just sort of went in that direction.
And you call yourself a modern, or maybe the channel, what you're reviewing, modern enthusiast vehicles. What do you mean by modern?
Well, the channel, I guess, has sort of evolved into that also. But when we launched Cars and Bids, which was about 3 years ago, the focus was on what we considered modern cars. So from the 1980s to sort of the present day. And the channel has always kind of focused on those. I have tried to review some cars from the older era as well. 60s, 70s, which cars that actually greatly interest and excite me. But I find that the audience just isn't quite there as much. YouTube audiences are younger. They tend to max out maybe in their 50s. And those people grew up around cars, kind of the 80s being sort of the oldest things that they're really interested in. And so I've tried to review cars in the 60s and 70s. I even did a Lamborghini Miura review about 18 months ago, and it just doesn't perform that well. So I've kind of focused all my energy on the newer cars.
Let's go back a little bit. Did you grow up in a car-loving family?
Not at all. My father had when I was born, he had a 1988 Toyota Camry, and he replaced that 10 years later with a 1998 Toyota Camry. And he's still driving the car he replaced that with, which is a Lexus RX. And so he only had 3 cars.
Version of a Camry.
Right. At some point he graduated. So I had no car interest. I have no idea where it came from. I think my family and I are still a little bit dumbfounded about how it all happened.
Still scratching your head, wondering how you're in the car business.
Yeah, no one in my
lawyer.
Right. I should have gone to law school.
So when you were starting out and you're trying to decide which vehicles that you're going to put on the newly created channel, how did you decide which vehicles you wanted on there?
Initially, when I was reviewing my own cars, I would actually do audience polls, and whatever won, I would buy. I would personally buy the car that my audience told me to. And that led to some cars that I didn't really want to buy, including a 1995 Hummer, a full-size AM General Hummer, which was a horrible car, especially because I lived in the center city, Philadelphia at the time. And having a Hummer in Philly is not really the ideal situation. It's not really a city designed for that. But then I just started to evolve to, I would just very closely watch what got views. And so if a certain type of car got views, I would say, okay, what made that car desirable? It was an exotic from the old days, or it was a brand new car that people were interested in. And that's sort of how I evolved to figuring out what people wanted to see.
And how about now? How are you deciding what vehicles that you review now? And how much time and effort goes into that?
It's become kind of a finely tuned process. Like we over the years, I've learned so much what people want that it's kind of become pretty clear to me, like, okay, so now my channel is, I basically still make 2 car review videos a week. And then there's some other videos here and there, but the car review videos are now, one of them is usually a brand new car that is in high demand. And then the other one is usually a car that we're selling on Cars and Bids that I think is interesting enough to justify a video with. For example, today we launched a video in an auction of a Saleen Ford Explorer. I don't know if Saleen in the 90s actually made a version of the Ford Explorer, which is a ridiculous proposition, of course, but that kind of thing. So I'm kind of splitting my time, if you will, between the new and modern stuff that gets more views, gets more traffic, and earns more revenue, and also the older stuff that brings people to the auction site, which also is, beneficial.